talking about how technology can help you. I'm here to tell you how you can help technology, if you will. I wanted to start by scaring everyone, because I like to scare people, just like Jordan. And so I looked up a few statistics and to figure out what the law market was like for young students. And it was pretty scary down in the US. According to the American Bar Association, between 45,000 and 50,000 law students graduated last year in 2012, but only 8,000 new jobs were created, so that's it. I'm also told by one of the founders here of this club that here at Queen's, even though I understand that you guys do quite well in terms of getting, securing summer articling jobs, etc., that only 26% of the second or third year law students at Queen's were successful in doing this in the on-campus interview process. So, you know, it's a brave new world out there, folks. So my advice for young lawyers is this: run with the gazelles. And by gazelles, I mean local firms that are loaded with creative potential. So what a lot of people talk about now in innovation experts, it's pretty widely accepted that the best recipe for economic growth now going ahead are some of these small, high-quality, innovative technology firms. And according to the OECD, these small, medium-sized enterprises account from anywhere from half to 3/4 of the economic activity in its member state. And to just give you an example, you all know if you're opening up your smartphones now, how many apps are on that. That's a great example of a gazelle. But even water filtration systems and environmental type technologies are also very important these days, and Canada's doing quite well at all of that. So again, what's interesting though about these is that the gazelles have one fatal flaw. They're terrible, they're dismal at managing their intellectual property. But their Achilles heel, I think, represents an opportunity for startups like you. And I'm going to circle back around to that in a moment, but give you a little bit more of some of the landscape. If you read the newspapers, and I hope you do, no, I know they're all in decline, or read some of the blogs. If you've read any of the newspapers in the last 2 years, you would have seen what I called innovation angst. There were so many stories written about woe is us, what's wrong in our country. And the governments, as I know, because I've been pulled in front of several inquiries and discussions about this, is that they're completely obsessed now with innovation. And the reason is that studies are showing that Canada is lagging. The Conference Board of Canada ranked Canada 14th out of 17th in innovation, and some others are ranking Canada 8th on innovation input, but only 54 on innovation efficiencies. And so there's a huge amount of fear here about what's going on, that we're not breeding enough innovation. And a lot of this has been placed at what they call bad bird. Canada has bad bird, which is business expenditures on research and development. And that is some of those very big, large companies like Grimm and Nortel just aren't doing the research anymore. However, there is some good news out there. You know, we are no longer the hewers of wood and drawers of water as much as we were. Sure, we're traditionally a resource-based economy, and therefore our jobs have been tied to resource extraction. But I think all the indicators are starting to show that the knowledge economy is continuing to grow. And where this is coming from, interestingly enough, although we've been wringing our hands a lot, and myself in particular, being a writer for business publications, have written a lot of late on Nortel and RIM, and whether RIM's going to go the way of Nortel, and what this all means for our technology jobs. But there's some interesting signs happening right now, and in fact there was an article in the Wall Street Journal just this week looking at what I would call sort of the shoots, the sprouts that are coming out of the roots of these big iconic companies of the past. So in this story, they were talking about Communitech, which is an incubation center in Waterloo, and it was reporting that they saw, the city of Waterloo saw 302 new startups in 2012. And that actually dwarfs the 85 companies that the think tank Urban Future said opened its doors up in the Big Apple. So it's pretty impressive that Waterloo is outpacing New York in terms of startup companies. In addition to this, I called Communitech myself, knowing I was coming here, just to find out, in addition to the actual companies in Waterloo, what other advisory services are they giving to other companies. And they said that last year they gave advice to over 600 startups last year. And you know, they're really only the tip of the iceberg. There's startups and incubators popping up everywhere across this country, from Grow Lab in Vancouver to oh, what's the one? Founder Fuel in Montreal. I mean, they're popping up everywhere, and it's quite amazing. And I think it's I think it's quite an exciting time. So we can look at that in a positive way. So. So this is why I said, why is there a job market then for startup lawyers? I mean, given that this is where we're going, and if you believe in this trend, one of the things I'll tell you about in terms of startups, and I've interviewed many and I'm now involved in one personally myself, is that in the research I did with the CIC, is that over 42% of these small, medium-sized enterprises are actually unfamiliar with the term intellectual property, and 62 of those decision makers had no idea how to protect or leverage it as an asset. And many have been sued in the US for IP infringement, and we'll touch a few on that. Most are very unaware of the licensing pathways available. Most don't cross-license, and most don't even know how to collaborate on IP share projects. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in which we can do. And the other thing that's quite interesting in looking at why it's important to have to be looking at our innovative companies and trying to find ways is that Canada is leaking talent in a very dramatic way. And this was some of the original research that I did for the CIC. And it showed that 66% of the IP from venture-backed companies sold between 2005 and 2010 went overseas. So IP that we're generating is leaching out of this country. And so there's now a growing, because of this report actually, there's now a growing awareness that we've got to do more to grow and keep our companies in our country and to deal with what we call this IP shortfall. Because Canada, if you look at all the list of other companies, we're actually leaking IP in quite a large way. So I guess what we're arguing is that it stands to reason that if Canadians are to assume their rightful place in the world, we have to retain control of an appreciable portion of the intellectual property we generate. And the question is, how do we go about and do this? What's really interesting right now is that there's starting to be an awareness among lawyers that there is a role for them to play in startup companies. Traditionally, and maybe Jordan would also say, a lot of startups would have a really hard time getting some good lawyers to work with them because, quite frankly, they just don't have the money. They don't have the pockets to do that. But what is happening now, and I think it's partially the recession, but partially also an awareness that these gazelles can actually grow into the next Nortels and Rims, that some more sophisticated and savvy lawyers are starting to actually help out and work with startups. So I was working with a company for this report, Fask and Martineau. They're developing an actual specialized department now to cater directly to startups in that kind of recognition. So if you acknowledge then that this innovation trend is happening, and you want to plan for the future, I would argue that you should add a few more arrows to your quiver and look at, if not studying engineering, or if you've got some background in science, whether it's chemistry, whether it's biology, and know how to read an IP, know how to read a patent, know how to do patent landscaping, you will be incredibly valuable in the next decade. So these were something that I thought I would throw out to you. And also, in order to do that, I wanted to sort of get you to try to understand a little bit of that landscape and why this might be important. There's a huge patent explosion going on right now around the world, in part because of universities trying to push a lot of their patents out there into the world and make money out of it, but also because of what's happening in countries like China and India. The number of patents that have grown in those countries is just unbelievably dramatic. And this race for the patents is creating huge seismic changes in the marketplace. And it's also creating what we call the dark side of patents, the stifling effect of those higher costs, competing patents, and litigation. So if you're starting a company today or have any emerging technology, you really have to think about protection. I was calling patents weapons of mass litigation. It was quite remarkable when I started my report. I had no idea really how much was going on. And it's true, intellectual property can make the world a better place, but I think it's also being increasingly used to wage war. And the battlefields have become our courtrooms. And these combatants range from large multinationals who spend billions to acquire patent portfolios. If you wonder where Nortel got that $7 million was from companies that were trying to buy them simply to use them for litigation purposes. It was as simple as that. Or they use it for defense. So if someone tries to sue them, they go, well, if you sue me with that, I'll sue you back with this. So it becomes sort of, they're using patents as sort of an armor. Or, in some cases too, to extract tribute from rival smaller companies who are trying to move into their marketplaces. You may have heard, you know, in Canada, our biggest IP litigation case did involve RIM back in 2000. That was the one I was familiar with when I started. It was by what they call a patent holding company called NTP, and they claimed that RIM had infringed on its system for sending emails between computers and wireless devices. RIM, interestingly enough, was not their only target. They put out 47 letters to other companies. RIM did fight back, whereas others sort of quietly wrote checks for them to go away. But at the time, litigation in the US wasn't quite as sophisticated as it is today in dealing with patents. And there was a threat of a US injunction, so RIM ended on settling for $612 million, which was about half of its revenue, US revenue at the time. Injunctions like this aren't happening, but still. What I think people didn't know, and I didn't know until I started doing this, was just how much litigation there is going on and how many Canadian companies have been impacted by this. The case that I like to use, my poster child for litigation, was Desire to Learn, which is an educational software company out of Waterloo that was sued by its competitor Blackboard when they tried to move into the US. They were sold, the lawsuit was for $56 million for patent infringement. Now remember, this at the time was a startup, probably had less than $2 million in the bank, so it was a pretty scary thing for them to take these guys on. In addition, the USPTO issued a preliminary warning, even though they issued a preliminary warning that the Blackboard's patent was issued improperly, it still remained in force and they had to still keep fighting it. In addition, the International Trade Commission also did a lawsuit, so they were being hit on both sides. Now, it almost killed Desire to Learn. They actually eventually settled out of court, and today they just, I think about 3 months ago, raised another $20 million from venture capitalists for Series B or C round. So they're doing fine. But but there's been a lot of companies that have been killed, Canadian companies, including one called Resonant Medical, a Montreal company that went under the litigation knife, so to speak. So it's a perilous road ahead, but I think the future, and my research has shown that the future to combat litigation and to move ahead for innovation is actually collaboration. And because it's no longer possible for businesses to control all these strategic elements of IP, especially in sectors where continuous innovation is important. And we know how all you have to do is open up, an old app you haven't opened up for a while and you've got a new update. I mean, innovation is all about iteration constantly. And so now that the new thesis is looking at open innovation in which companies leverage their expertise by sharing resources, and that is also a growing trend. And really, Canadians need to learn to be team players. But to do that, we have to hone our skills more in open innovation, which can be a perilous proposition because, as you can imagine, you start opening your kimono, and so to speak, you might have your IP stolen. However, this again, I think, which is interesting because when I first started this report, just to give you an example, and I was reaching out to some big law firms and I was talking that I was going to explore collaboration and innovation. And what was interesting was that I was told by some of the law firms, you can't talk about that because this is really important to talk about, you know, fighting and having patents and continuing this sort of litigation process. But in actual fact, this is, I think, where things are going. Canada, like some of the oil companies now are starting to actually pool some of their patents, work together. Nike has put some of its patents up for availability. And I think this actually, innovation doesn't mean free, and I think it actually means that we need better lawyering and more, you know, people that understand how to do IP management skills and develop good legal agreements. And I really think that that this is going to be the future, and this will require people with very strong legal backgrounds. So circling back to what I was saying initially, why I think that the future is what can you do for technology. I think that a lot of people that are interested in technology and the law have a huge opportunity ahead of them to actually address some of these issues and to deal with some of these, to deal with some startups. So my theme, I guess, today is companies require even better legal agreements and good lawyers to ensure that any competitive edge that they gain through R&D is not lost or stolen. And so I think I would argue that the startup nation also requires startup, or rather upstart, lawyers who are prepared to take this on as well. So I'll just leave it at that. If you have any other questions on IP, and just want to let you know that the Canadian International Council is the people that have sponsored this project is a nonpartisan council, and if you want any more information on them.